Stop buying this common silver, because what looks like a bargain today could become one of the most expensive mistakes in a silver portfolio tomorrow. The metal may be real, the silver may have value, but when it comes time to sell, the market may not value it the way the buyer expected. And that is where the real danger begins, because the difference between a smart silver investment and an F-tier purchase is not always the amount of silver sitting in the hand. It is what the market is willing to pay for it when that silver needs to become cash. Today, one overlooked category could reveal exactly why experienced stackers think differently about silver, but the biggest problem with this common silver may not become obvious until the moment an investor tries to sell it. Welcome to Next Alert, where markets, gold, silver, and the forces shaping the economy are examined from an investor's perspective. If this kind of market analysis is useful, consider subscribing, especially if you want to stay ahead of the next major move rather than understand it after it happens. And before going further, let the channel know where this video is being watched from. City, country, or anywhere around the world. Because by the end of this video, one simple question could completely change the way silver is bought. What if the cheapest silver is actually the hardest silver to sell? The silver market has always attracted investors with a simple promise: buy real metal, hold it, and let time work in their favor. But that idea becomes much more complicated when the silver itself is purchased in the wrong form. A piece can contain genuine silver and still be a poor investment. That is the distinction many buyers overlook. When silver prices rise, almost every form of silver can appear attractive. The headline price of the metal moves higher, dealers become busier, and investors begin searching for anything they can buy before prices move even further. In that environment, the cheapest looking silver can seem like the smartest choice. But experienced stackers ask a different question. They do not only ask, how much silver is being purchased? They ask, how easily can this silver be sold later, and at what price? That second question changes everything. In the world of business, an asset is not valuable simply because it exists. Its usefulness depends partly on how easily it can be valued, transferred, and converted back into capital. Silver works the same way. A standardized 1-ounce bar with clearly marked weight and purity is immediately recognizable. A widely traded bullion coin can often be priced against the spot market within seconds. Dealers know what they are buying, buyers know what they are getting, and the transaction can happen with relatively little friction. But some common silver products do not enjoy that advantage. They may require additional testing, their purity may be less convenient to verify, their market may be smaller, their original retail price may include premiums that disappear completely when the product reaches the secondary market. This creates a hidden cost. The buyer sees the amount paid at the beginning. The real investor must also consider the amount that can realistically be recovered at the end. That difference is where many seemingly attractive silver purchases become inefficient. Imagine two investors entering the same silver market. One chooses a standardized product with strong recognition and consistent dealer demand. The other chooses a less liquid form because it appears cheaper or because the product contains silver that seems undervalued. If silver rises substantially, both may feel successful. Until they try to sell, the first investor may have several buyers competing for the metal. The second may discover that the dealer is focused almost entirely on the underlying melt value, regardless of what the original purchase price was. Suddenly, the cheaper purchase does not look so cheap. This is why the concept of an F-tier silver product matters. The designation does not mean the metal has no value. It means the structure surrounding that metal may make it inefficient for someone whose primary objective is investment. And there is an even bigger issue. A silver investor is not only purchasing ounces, the investor is purchasing future flexibility. If capital becomes necessary, if silver prices move sharply, or if another opportunity appears, an easily liquidated asset can become useful immediately. And a liquid asset can become a problem. That is the warning behind this category of silver, because the real mistake may not happen when it is bought. It may happen years later when the owner finally discovers what the market is actually willing to pay. There is a moment in every investment when the screen stops showing what was paid and starts revealing what the market actually thinks the asset is worth. For some silver buyers, that moment can be uncomfortable. The purchase may have looked intelligent. The price may have been lower than other forms of silver. The product may have been widely available, easy to find, and backed by a familiar name. But when the owner walks into the secondary market, the calculation can change completely. The dealer does not care what the original advertisement promised. The dealer cares about what can be verified, what can be resold, and how quickly another buyer is likely to take it. That is the hidden economics behind low-cost silver. A buyer may think the objective is simply to acquire as many ounces as possible for the lowest possible price. But that strategy ignores an important variable: the cost of getting those ounces back into the market. In business, this would be called transaction friction. Every additional obstacle between an asset and its next buyer can reduce its practical value. The same principle applies to silver. Consider a standardized bullion product. Its weight is clearly marked, its purity is clearly stated, its format is familiar. Dealers have seen thousands of similar pieces before. Pricing can be compared against the spot price with relatively little uncertainty. Now compare that with silver that requires more explanation. If a dealer has to test it before determining its exact content, that introduces uncertainty. If the product has limited demand, the dealer may need a larger margin to protect against the possibility of holding it for months. If the original buyer paid a substantial premium, that premium may not survive the resale process. The result can be surprising. Silver can rise in price while the owner still fails to achieve the return expected. This is because there are actually two markets involved. There is the market for buying silver from a dealer, and there is the market for selling silver back to a dealer. Those prices are rarely identical. The spread between them represents part of the real cost of ownership. That is why experienced investors often pay attention to liquidity before appearance. A product can look impressive, carry a fascinating design, or even have a loyal collector base. But those qualities do not automatically guarantee efficient resale. The same principle explains why some ordinary-looking silver products remain popular year after year. They are predictable. Predictability has economic value. When a product is recognized across the market, the investor is not forced to convince every potential buyer that the metal is legitimate or desirable. The market already understands what it is. That reduces friction. And reduced friction can matter enormously when capital needs to move quickly. This becomes especially important during periods of market stress. If silver prices suddenly surge, investors may want to sell into strength. If prices fall sharply, some may want to raise cash. If another opportunity appears, capital tied up in an inefficient asset can become difficult to redeploy. That is where the difference between owning silver and owning efficient silver becomes impossible to ignore. The common mistake is to judge a purchase at the moment of acquisition. The smarter approach is to judge it from both ends. What does it cost to enter? What will it realistically cost to exit? And, perhaps most importantly, who will be waiting on the other side when the time comes? For the category now sitting in the F tier, those questions create a serious problem because the weakness is not necessarily the silver itself. The weakness is the market around it. And once that distinction becomes clear, the reason this particular type of silver can look attractive at the beginning while becoming frustrating at the end becomes much harder to ignore. Most investors spend far more time thinking about how to enter a market than how to leave it. That may work for some assets. It can be dangerous with silver. The moment a silver purchase is completed, the buyer owns more than a piece of metal. The buyer also owns a future transaction problem. At some point, that silver may need to be converted back into cash, traded for another asset, or used to take advantage of a new opportunity. And that is where liquidity becomes the dividing line. Two silver products can contain almost the same amount of metal and still behave very differently when they reach the secondary market. One may receive immediate offers. The other may receive questions. One may be priced almost instantly. The other may need to be tested, weighed, examined, and discounted. One may have buyers waiting. The other may depend on finding the right buyer. For an investor, those differences are not cosmetic. They are economic. This is why the most efficient silver is often not the most exciting silver. A plain, recognizable piece of bullion can outperform a more unusual product simply because the market understands it better. That recognition creates a kind of financial infrastructure around the metal. Dealers know how to price it. Investors know what it is worth relative to spot. Buyers know what they are looking for. The product can move through the market without requiring a long explanation. That is what makes liquidity powerful. Now consider what happens when that infrastructure disappears. A buyer may have paid a premium because the product looked unique. Perhaps it was marketed as scarce, collectible, or different from ordinary bullion. At the time of purchase, that distinction may have seemed valuable. But scarcity only matters when another buyer is willing to pay for it. If the secondary market does not recognize that premium, the original buyer is left carrying the difference. This is one of the most important principles in asset allocation. A price is only useful if the market can support it. An advertised retail price is not the same thing as realizable value. That distinction becomes even more important during volatile markets. When silver moves sharply, investors may suddenly want flexibility. A business owner may need liquidity. A trader may want to rotate capital. An investor may see a better opportunity elsewhere. Standardized bullion can provide that flexibility more efficiently because its value is easier for the market to understand. The F-tier category presents the opposite problem. It may still contain genuine silver. It may still have a legitimate purpose. It may even be interesting from a collecting perspective. But investment efficiency is measured differently. The question is not whether the product is interesting. The question is whether the investor is receiving enough silver exposure for the money being committed while maintaining a reasonable path back to cash. That is where many buyers make a subtle mistake. They compare products using only the purchase price per ounce. A more sophisticated comparison considers the entire journey. Purchase price, premium, verification, dealer spread, resale demand, time required to liquidate. And finally, the amount of capital recovered. That is the complete economic picture. For young entrepreneurs and business-minded investors, this principle extends far beyond silver. Capital should remain productive. An asset that is difficult to value or difficult to liquidate carries an opportunity cost. Even if the asset itself does not decline, the investor can still lose flexibility by holding it. That is why experienced stackers often favor boring silver, not because boring is automatically better, but because simplicity can reduce friction. And when the objective is wealth preservation rather than collecting, reducing unnecessary friction can be more valuable than owning something that looks impressive. The F-tier silver category therefore reveals a broader lesson. The strongest investment is not always the one with the most attractive story attached to it. Sometimes the strongest asset is the one that needs the least explanation when it is time to sell, and that brings the analysis to the final question. If the goal is to protect capital, increase silver exposure, and preserve future flexibility, what forms of silver deserve the money that would otherwise be trapped in an inefficient purchase? The final decision is not about whether every F-tier silver product is worthless. It is about whether it deserves a place in an investment strategy. That distinction matters. A product can contain genuine silver and still be a poor choice for someone whose objective is wealth preservation. It can be interesting, collectible, historically significant, or visually impressive while remaining inefficient as a core investment holding. The mistake begins when those two objectives are treated as the same. Collecting is driven by preference. Investing is driven by economics. For a collector, an unusual piece may justify a premium because the design, history, rarity, or personal meaning provides value beyond its metal content. For an investor, that premium creates a different question. Will the next buyer recognize and pay for the same premium? If the answer is uncertain, the investment becomes dependent on finding a very specific buyer rather than participating in a broad and liquid market. That is precisely why F-tier silver deserves caution. The problem is not necessarily the ounces inside it. The problem is the amount of capital required to acquire those ounces compared with the amount of flexibility the investor receives in return. A smarter approach begins with a simple principle. The form of the silver matters almost as much as the silver itself. Standardized bullion tends to have several advantages. The weight is recognizable. The purity is clearly established. The market already understands the product. Dealers can compare it against spot pricing. And buyers are more likely to recognize what they are purchasing. Those characteristics reduce uncertainty. They also make the eventual exit easier. That does not mean every standard bullion product automatically becomes a great investment. Premiums still matter. Dealer spreads still matter. The purchase price still matters. But the structure is generally easier to understand, and when capital preservation is the objective, simplicity has value. The same principle applies to classic junk silver and widely traded bullion coins. Their appeal is not necessarily that they are exciting. Their appeal is that there is an established market around them. That market gives investors options. Options matter when markets become unpredictable. If silver rises sharply, liquid holdings can potentially be sold without requiring the investor to educate the buyer about what they own. If another opportunity appears, capital can be redeployed more efficiently. If financial conditions become difficult, recognizable assets can provide a clearer path toward liquidity. That is the real lesson hidden behind an F-tier ranking. The objective of stacking is not simply to accumulate the largest number of ounces possible. It is to accumulate metal in a form that preserves purchasing power while maintaining reasonable flexibility. That changes how every silver purchase should be evaluated. Before buying, an investor can ask several simple questions. How much silver is actually being acquired? How much premium is being paid above its underlying metal value? How recognizable is the product? How many dealers would realistically buy it? Would the secondary market pay for its special features? And perhaps the most important question of all, what happens if the owner needs to sell tomorrow? If the answer is uncertain, the product deserves a much harder look. This is especially important for business-minded investors. Capital has an opportunity cost. Money placed into an inefficient asset cannot easily be redirected toward another opportunity. A product that requires a large premium and produces a weak exit can quietly reduce the efficiency of an entire portfolio. That does not mean unusual silver should never be purchased. It means it should be purchased for the right reason. If the purpose is collecting, personal enjoyment, or specialized speculation, the calculation is different. But if the objective is straightforward exposure to silver with a strong emphasis on liquidity and capital efficiency, the F-tier category should remain at the bottom of the list. The broader lesson reaches far beyond precious metals. Smart investors do not judge assets only by how attractive they look when they enter the portfolio. They judge them by what happens when circumstances change. An investment becomes truly useful when it can preserve value, remain understandable to the market, and provide an efficient exit when capital is needed elsewhere. That is why the smartest silver purchase may not be the rarest piece, the most elaborate design, or even the product with the lowest advertised price. It may simply be the silver that the market already understands, because when the next major move in silver arrives, the investors with the greatest advantage may not be the ones holding the most unusual metal. They may be the ones holding the metal that can move when they need it to. And that is the real reason this common silver belongs in the F tier.